Hey, family, and welcome to the Tornville podcast. My name is Nicole Walters, and I'm a Christian based content creator here to help you navigate your walk with Christ. Hey, family, and welcome to another video. This week's video is going to be tying in quite a bit to our last week's video. So if you haven't watched it yet, you don't have to stop this video to watch that one first. You can watch that one after the completion of this video. It was about acceptance and how you are accepted by God. So in that video, we talked about the fact of the matter. So this video, I wanted to double down a little bit on the emotions of being accepted and chosen by God. And so this video is going to be talking about the fact that you are not damaged goods. You are not too far gone to be able to come back and to find Christ. And so this video is going to help us discover how to find our worth in, quite frankly, a worthless world. And so in trying to find our way and navigating this world, we find a term that is used quite frequently, and that is this word of fitting in. And so fitting in speaks to if you've ever felt like an outsider, ever felt like you never belonged. And this can even go to places where you feel like you should belong in these spaces. For example, your home or in your marital home or even at work. Sometimes that transcends to school. And so this desire to fit in doesn't equal belonging. Sometimes we use those two words synonymously and they're not the same. So fitting in does not mean belonging. And so what ends up happening when we try to fit in, when we try to push ourselves into spaces that God has not called us to, it creates this pain. And in this pain, there's this pressure to change ourselves from who God has called us to be in order to be accepted. We try to be more palatable. This world is full of these types of spaces where we have to be politically correct. And sometimes that can take us out of alignment with who and where God has called us to be. And so this even sometimes can lead us to like feeling like we can't even bring our Bibles to work because what is our neighbor or our coworker or our desk buddy going to think if we bring our Bible? Or it's not cool for you to bring your Bible to school, so why would you bring it there? And so we change ourselves, or it suppresses us from becoming more of who God has called us to be, to try to fit in and try to seem like the status quo. And so this sometimes can also be stemmed from broken homes. And a lot of times what we don't realize is that in every single one of us there's a child, and sometimes that child didn't have the greatest upbringing. And so this brokenness can come from broken homes. If you've ever lived in a split household, or even if your parents were together and family was together, but there was just disconnect and this discord. And so this rejection that you might feel in these spaces, even in school, or being labeled like you're too much or you're not enough. I remember in high school, while I was on my way there, and I always used to listen to music. Music is just my thing. And so they were like, "What are you listening to?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm listening to Nickelback." They're like, "Oh, you're white today." And I was like, "What?" So there's this thing that happens, and even in its simplicity, it actually created this dichotomy in my mind where I felt like I had to do more of this or be less of that in order to feel accepted. So like the next day, and I mean, this is by choice. I would always listen to whatever music I felt like. But on my way to school that day, I ended up listening to Vibes Cartel and Spice. And then it was, "Oh, you're black today." So there's this need to fit in, or this labeling that we get of not being enough or being too much, that can create this culture in our mind, or creates a culture in general where we celebrate these surface level inclusions where we feel like we got to do certain things in order to be accepted into certain spaces. But these surface level inclusions tend to actually reject those of us who have been either deeply broken or deeply hurt. And so we got to stop ourselves from trying to fit into the spaces that God has never designed us to be a part of. And Psalm 139:14 says, "I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, my soul knows it very well. And the word that I love here is my soul. And sometimes in our mind, we forget that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that we were made with intention, and every piece of us is known to God. Verse 15 says, "My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth." And this speaks to our creation piece in our mother's wombs. And so this moment of creation, this moment of birth, or being made and formed and fashioned, these things that we think we can hide from God, these moments and these ideas that come into our mind where we think that we can shield ourselves from being tapped into by God, we are all exposed to Him. And He says, "Your eyes saw my unformed substance," in verse 16. "In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." So even before the very foundations of our moments, our time in the land of the living, God had written and ordained every single day that we were to live and breathe in. And this goes beyond when we were even born, when we took our first breath. God actually wrote out these days. So my life was formed and fashioned for me well beyond the date of my birth. So my June 18th, 2025 was written for me long before my parents were even born. All of these days were ordained by us, and it goes to show us that we're not accidental. We are not disposable, even that we are here with a purpose, that we are here with intentionality on the part of God. So we got to move and operate from that space. So we're made to reflect God's image because He created us in His image. But so oftentimes we try to replicate the world's image. We try to be a part of what social media has called us to be, what the in clothing is, how we're supposed to be dressed, how we're supposed to be addressed, how we're supposed to even be seen in the world, and completely lose shape of who God has called us to be. It's like you're the shape of a star, but you're trying to squeeze yourself into the shape of a square, and it just doesn't work. Or sometimes you might get away with it where you're again the shape of a star, and you can pass through the shape of a circle, but the contours of the star, there's these gaps, these empty spaces that are left empty because we're not fitting in, we're not being put into the positions and the places where God has called us to be. And so it honestly reminds me, and it just shows me how beyond ourselves this sentiment is. And my toxic trait, honestly, is to watch like these shows called Love is Blind and Love Island and The Ultimatum, and all these shows. And so this is my toxic trait, okay? And while watching these shows, I just always sit there and I'm so flabbergasted, honestly, with how entranced a lot of these girls get with being so infatuated by these guys, where they're sitting under them for 2 weeks tops, and then bombshell walks into the island, and all of a sudden the guy's turning his eyes, she's bawling her eyes out, and I'm like, girl, why are you crying? I'm like, why are you crying? You only been there for 2 weeks, you don't even know his middle name. And when I see the desire to be wanted, to be accepted, to be approved of, and it intoxicates them to the point where they have almost like this lack of self-worth and self value. And so when we don't align ourselves with God, when we don't align ourselves with His principles, we can fall into those traits so effortlessly. And God didn't design us for crowds, He designed us for covenant. And that covenant speaks to intimacy, and that intimacy begins to build this deep and just impactful relationship with Christ. And there was a quote that I heard years ago, and this quote says that, before you have sex, you take each other's clothes off. After you dress yourself. Moral of the story: no one helps you once you get nailed. It used a different word, but you follow my drift. And so, even in that whoa, it goes to show you what we do emotionally and spiritually with the world. We undress ourselves, we unveil ourselves to the world, expecting us to be loved and accepted and cherished and held and valued. But what we get is the polar opposite. It's once we're exposed and once we are in our our just everything, our nakedness, it's almost as if the polar opposite happens and the world just turns its back on us completely. You've been used, you satisfied them, you fit your purpose for the moment, and now you're just disposable, you're just displaceable. And in that comes this brokenness, because now instead of feeling that love, that cherishedness, that desire to be wanted, to be valued, all of that goes out the window. And then you perpetuate this habit where you long for it again, and then you go after it again, and then you think you got it, and you undress yourself again, and then it's just this vicious cycle that you get trapped in. And so I want to give you the space and the moment to understand that we got to stop that line of thinking. We got to stop doing that. And sometimes it might be that we do it physically, sometimes we do it spiritually, sometimes we do it emotionally. At whatever capacity that you do that at, I want you to know and understand that God has called you for so much more. You're not a doormat, you're not something that's disposable. God has called you into this world with an intentional line of thought, a place of thinking where he's called you to be and to do this specific thing. And all you got to do is lean into him. And it reminds me in Genesis when Adam and Eve discovered their nakedness. And in order for God to clothe them, they had to undress themselves, they had to unveil themselves. So that level of unveiling that a lot of us find ourselves so willing to do for the world that doesn't even value us, how much more are you supposed to allow yourself to become vulnerable for God to do a work in you and to cover you and to clothe you and to become intimate with you, so you can build this relationship with him and that he can give you the garments that you need. And so it reminds me of 1 Corinthians 6, 19 to 20, and it says, or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own. And so when we realize that, sometimes we don't realize that we give ourselves away to things and people that do not deserve it, frankly, point blank period. They just don't deserve it. But you got to give your all to God, because he has ordained you to be a temple for his Holy Spirit. So there is value in honoring yourself. And verse 20 goes on to say, for you were bought with a price, so glorify God in your body. And now, depending on your background, depending on where you've come from, being not of your own can be extremely daunting, and it can be really challenging, especially if you were someone that was taken advantage of or sold in any capacity. And so when it comes to this word of ownership or being purchased or bought with a price, I want you to break that line of thinking where it feels like you've become now a prisoner in a negative sense. God doesn't do anything to cause you harm. And so it will take some time for you to break the idea of you belonging to God. But I do want to encourage you to investigate the idea and the sentiment of you belonging to God. God paid a huge price for each and every single one of us to be with him, to be a part of him. And so when we understand the price and the shedding of the blood of Christ, we begin to have an honor for what took place on that day. And so, again, I do want to encourage you to not think of this as a jail or a prison sentence, depending on your past and your history. I want you to understand that what you are stepping into is a covenant with God, a marriage, a beautiful relationship that will lift you up and will bring you to the place that you are meant to be in. Because remember, we don't need to fit in, we need to be filled with the love of God, and he needs to be within us. And so this video honestly is for anyone who is ready to belong to someone who doesn't require performance. God is not asking you to put on a big show. He's not asking you for your Instagram to be popping. He's not asking you to have on the latest drip or whatever that looks like. God is just looking for you to be vulnerable in your essence to Him, to allow Him to fill you. And so, in all of this, I want to introduce you to Christ and who you are to become and to be in Him. Understand that your value is not based on the world's system or the world's metrics on what they say you should be or what you should look like. None of that. All of it is irrelevant. All of it doesn't matter. None of it matters, because what you end up doing is giving yourself over to a world that is in love with itself. And why would you put yourself in a position to be used and thrown aside when you can be loved and cherished by a God who has your best interest at heart, the God that knows you're coming and you're going, how many hairs are on your head, that intimacy that He's looking to have with you? Why wouldn't you want to have a relationship with Him? And so I challenge you, if you've never met Christ or you've never, been into a church or anything like that, I really want to encourage you to find a home church and to build and look to build a relationship with God. I had a whole series that you could tap into if you're new to the channel that's actually called the Building Relationship with God series. And so when we go into these spaces of intimacy with Him, we'll realize that our self-value is not in ourselves, but it's in who we belong to, which is Christ. And so if this video has touched you in any way, or if you know that this video can assist anyone, I pray that you will share it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. If you like podcasts, these videos are up on Spotify for you to watch. And as always, family, I really encourage you to just stay in His presence and to not be lost into the society and the ideas of what the world is calling you to be. Always stay focused on who He's called you to be. Understand that your value is in Him and you are priceless. And so when we understand that, we're able to deepen our relationship with Him. So again, I pray that you have a great rest of your week. I will see you in next week's video. I love you all. Be blessed.